Welcome to the Harry Reve podcast. I'm your host, Harry Reve, and today we'll be taking a journey through the concept of evolution and its remarkable impact on life as we know it. I know that sounds like a big topic, but just stay with me. I'll make it super simple for everyone listening. This will include many topics like the history of evolution, important figures in evolution, and even the religious conflict that the findings of evolution have had on Christianity. So grab a drink, sit back, and let's dive into this together as we go back in time to learn just about everything there is to know about evolution. Evolution, the process that has shaped every living organism on our planet, is a captivating and very interesting phenomenon. From the smallest microorganisms to the largest mammals, the story of life on Earth is strongly connected with the forces of evolution. Today, we'll explore the key concepts, mechanisms, and evidence behind evolution itself, which sounds super interesting. We're going to have a lot of fun. But before we can start, we must first understand the story of a man named Charles Darwin and his huge impact on biology as we know it. So, Charles Darwin was a biologist that is mostly known for his theory of evolution, which at the time heavily conflicted with people's previous beliefs. Christianity was really against it when it first happened, but we'll get more into that later. Another question that you may be asking is, how did he come to this conclusion of evolution? Well, I'll tell you that story. Darwin decided to partake on a 5-year journey through multiple countries and multiple continents to collect research upon multiple different native species. After dedicating so much time into his travels, he decided to publish his findings in a book called On the Origins of Species. That's the book title, On the Origins of Species. His theory of evolution remains a cornerstone of modern biology and continues to guide scientific research and inquiry to this very day. Darwin would go on to make discoveries on topics such as sexual selection, plant biology, and the role of earthworms in soil formation. But even though that's all super impressive, he will always be known as the founder of the evolutionary theory. Charles Darwin's legacy as one of the most influential scientists in history is definitely undeniable. His contributions to evolution biology revolutionized our understanding of life's diversity and the process that shapes it. Now that you know Darwin and all he's done for science, let's talk about his findings. Since we understand who Charles Darwin is, let's discuss one of the main principles of his theory, natural selection. Since we actually know the history of Charles Darwin and his 5-year trip, and now we know all that type of stuff, let's get into what he actually wrote about in his book, and the main subject was natural selection. This suggests that different animals within their own species that have better traits that suit their environment are more likely to survive and more likely to reproduce and pass on those traits to future generations. Since these animals that have these better traits are able to survive because of those traits help them out, they're able to reproduce, and through genes they're able to reproduce and give those traits to the next generation. Over time, this leads to a species becoming more and more equipped for their environments. Natural selection is driven by various factors, such as competition for resources and changes in the environment, but the main leading factor that all those lead up to is just survival. Let me give you guys an analogy to help better understand what I'm trying to talk about. So, as humans, we face challenges and problems on a daily basis, but we're able to learn from those mistakes and maybe the next day, maybe the next week, but still over time, we learn to prevent them and learn to make other choices that don't lead to our mistakes that we've already met and actually have dealt with before. This is an analogy for evolution. It's a much slower process, but over time, species will change in appearance or even learn from their ancestors' mistakes and take on generational knowledge. One fascinating example of adaptation is the development of bacteria. Through natural selection, bacteria is actually able to resistance. They have a lot of resistance, but the ones that do possess a resistance gene have survived and reproduced, creating strains that are more difficult to treat. This is the reasoning for viruses that are impossible to get rid of. For example, the common flu or a cold are constantly changing year in and year out to adapt to modern medicine. So even bacteria is able to evolve. And the strains that actually have this resistant gene are the ones that are able to reproduce and keep going and going and going because they're the ones that aren't getting caught, or however you want to say it. But it is still impossible to cure all types of these viruses due to them always changing and adapting. Another crucial concept in evolution is genetic variation. Genetic variation refers to the differences in genes between individuals of a shared population. These variations arise through mechanisms like genetic mutation and genetic recombination during reproduction. That may sound confusing, but it's quite simple. For example, if the same species is divided and forced to live in different climates for hundreds of years, they will adapt only in ways that will help them survive. Even though they were the same species, these evolutionary changes will drastically change this species. This is the reasoning for all the amazing diversity of life we see today. For example, the Galapagos finches, which were studied by Charles Darwin during his travels, like I talked about before. This is another key point in Charles Darwin's book. These finches shared a common ancestor but have developed different beak sizes over a long period of time, enabling them to do all the activities that they specifically have to do, considering where they live now, considering to other animals in that population, considering to mostly to survival, because since they're in two different climates, one of them needs this size beak for survival, another needs this size beak for survival. It just makes everything way easier. This showcases how genetic variation and natural selection drive the evolution of new species over time. Throughout history, Earth has experienced several mass extinctions that have profoundly impacted the course of evolution. One of the most famous events is the extinction of the dinosaurs. Of course, we all know about this, but what you might not have known is that the extinction of dinosaurs opened up the ways for mammals to actually flourish without this main predator around. Taking away a huge predator will drastically affect the population of a specific animal. A great example of this is Yellowstone National Park. It's a national park in the United States. And I know this sounds like we're straying away from our main topic a little bit, but just stay with me. It'll all make sense. Just let me say this one story. Back in 1995, Yellowstone had a serious coyote problem. This was due to coyotes being at the top of the food chain. Without a predator, they quickly overpopulated. This also made animals like elk and deer overpopulated because they didn't have a main predator as well. So, to combat this main problem, Yellowstone decided to reintroduce wolves into the park, an animal that was originally driven to extinction in the park over 100 years ago. Only the hope, this is all that they thought would happen, was that they would kill off some of the coyotes and deers and kind of that would level off a little bit. But what they didn't expect was a crazy turn of events. Introducing wolves didn't just balance out the coyote and deer population, but also helped save the entire ecosystem of the park. The roles resulted in a chain reaction that allowed other animals like beavers, fish, and songbirds to return to the park. With the returning, it caused the entire ecosystem to change for the better. For example, grass was able to grow in spots that it wouldn't have before, and the water was able to flow better because there was more beavers and there was more fish. Overall, this one change, just adding wolves to the park, completely changed the ecosystem of this park. So, pretty much, that kind of concludes and makes it clear that just one animal being added or being extinct from an ecosystem can drastically change it. And this is a huge reason for why, when dinosaurs went extinct, mammals were able to flourish. And since mammals were able to flourish, eventually, after a long, long process, this would all lead to humans. Humans as a species have a remarkable ability to influence their own evolution. Through cultural practices, technology, and medicine, we have altered the pressure acting upon us. As a result, certain traits that were helpful in the past may no longer be as significant in our modern society. For example, humans are now unable to eat raw meat. This is due to inventions like being able to cook meat. Another example is all the hairy stuff on this body. This evolutionary process, way back thousands of years ago, used to be super helpful, but now it's just not really helpful and we don't need it. So we're able to move past that and still evolving and still getting better, because even though we had that stuff initially, we don't need it anymore. While those examples were us losing traits, we have as especially as a species, my bad about that, as a species, had a lot of growth. We've been able to constantly learn new information to adapt to our environment, and we're even able to adapt our own environment. When I say that, I more mean like buildings and all this amazing architecture that us humans, we're the only ones on the whole earth that are able to do this, and I feel like that's quite amazing, just how self-aware we are. Speaking of self-awareness, humans are, of course, different from any other species in the world. The main thing that separates us is our self-understanding. We actually question our own existence and don't just live to survive. As we've seen through this whole podcast, the other animals, the whole reason for evolution is to make it so survival is easier depending on the ecosystem that they're living in. The decisions we make aren't just for survival, but to thrive. There's no other species that focuses on being the best they can possibly be besides us. We focus on survival, but we also want to, enjoy our lives. We want to thrive in our communities. We want to be successful. We have all these other goals that still lead to survival, but it's a lot more stuff than any other animal or bacteria in the whole world. This is why human evolution is so interesting. We actually understand what is happening around us, not just from a survival aspect. While we are a very smart species, we are a very complicated and sometimes stubborn species as well. Stubbornness can lead us to not believing in each other and not wanting to accept new information that conflicts with their beliefs. For example, this was a huge problem with evolution when it was first proposed, was that it directly interfered with Christianity. Christianity has been around since the mid-1st century CE. They all heavily believed in their faith, and up until 1859 didn't have much reason not to. So when Darwin's book was published, many Christians did not embrace this concept of evolution. This was due to a clash between the biblical interpretation of creation and the emerging scientific theories proposed by Darwin. The belief in the Bible's account of creation, as described in the book of Genesis, held significant influence over Christian communities at the time. According to this interpretation, God created the world and all living beings in their current form, dismissing the idea of gradual change over time. Back when this happened, way long ago, Christians were super upset. Additionally, the theory of evolution challenged the special status of human beings as creation distanced from other forms of life. potentially undermining deeply held religious beliefs about humanity's unique proportions and relationship to God. These factors contributed to the skepticism and resistance to accepting evolution among many Christians. Darwin's theory heavily insulted these super strong Catholics because they kind of took it as an insult, as being like, oh, you don't believe in the Bible, and this is what we believe in, and this is what we not dedicate our lives to, but it's a really huge part of their lives, and they felt super disrespected by Darwin's book, even though that was not the intention at all. Darwin only made that book just to share light on his amazing hypothesis that is pretty accurate and still stands up to this day. Most Christians have adapted to the possibility of evolution and are able to have faith in their beliefs and still believe in Christianity. As we navigate the 21st century, the study of evolution remains as relevant as ever. It helps us understand the interconnectedness of all life forms and sheds light on our place in the natural world. By comprehending the past, we gain insights into the present and future, allowing us to make informed decisions about conservation, medicine, and our own well-being. Well, that concludes the podcast for today. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you learned something new, and I'll be back next week with a new podcast. Thank you so much. Signing off, the Hero of a Podcast.